Minister Blair, thanks for your time today.
Yeah, of course, David.
So as we are speaking, because we are taping this interview, the first evacuation flight has taken off from Tel Aviv. What is your biggest concern right now in terms of your ability to evacuate Canadians in the coming days?
Well, we've had well over 4,000 Canadians currently in Israel register with Consular Affairs, and many of them are expressing concerns and want very much to get to a place of safety. We have, as you are already aware, mobilized a number of Canadian Forces planes. The first one has actually touched down in Tel Aviv, and it's now headed back to a place of safety. But we want to make sure that we provide the services that Canadians in Israel require and get people to safety as quickly as possible.
But you're obviously doing a risk assessment on this operation in real time. What's the biggest risk right now to the Canadian Armed Forces planes being able to safely run these shuttles from Israel to Athens?
We have done a very careful assessment of that, David, but we believe under the circumstances we've got the necessary flyover requirements to bring these planes safely in and out. There are other commercial flights that are still traveling from the Ben Gurion airport, but of course the vast majority of those commercial flights have been canceled. It became very, very difficult for Canadians to get flight options. And so we've tried very hard to make sure that we can respond as quickly as possible to people's concerns and get them to safety so that they can get safely home.
You went to this NATO summit. I would suspect that the agenda was going to be largely about Ukraine when it was scheduled, and quickly became in many ways about Israel. And you and your fellow NATO defense ministers were briefed by Israel's defense minister today. We're told that was quite a stark briefing. What did you hear?
Yeah, it was. It was actually deeply disturbing, David. We saw images of Israeli women and children, and their citizens who had been, horribly attacked and murdered, and we heard very clearly from the defense minister of Israel about the huge impact that it's had on their country and everything they're doing to respond to it. There was also obviously a robust discussion among all our NATO allies. Canada and the U.S., of course, and there was overwhelming support for the people of Israel and their right to defend themselves against this type of terrorist attack.
Prime Minister Netanyahu and his war cabinet are promising to wipe Hamas off the face of the earth. Did the defense minister for Israel give you any indication of the scale of their military response?
We talked very briefly about it. I'm not going to get into the details of their military response. We do understand the importance of Israel being able to defend itself against this type of attack and to hold the terrorists who committed these vicious and horrible assaults to account for their crimes.
The challenge, of course, Minister, is that where Hamas is, there are a lot of people who aren't members of Hamas. There's a lot of civilians there. There are hostages there. We're seeing reports of aid workers who have been killed by the Israeli strikes, Palestinian children who have been killed by the Israeli strikes. What concerns do you have about how Israel is responding in its bombardment of Gaza?
Well, I think we all feel very strongly that there has already been a totally unacceptable slaughter of innocents in Israel, and we want to make sure that in Israel's efforts to defend itself and defend its country, that there is no further humanitarian violations that take place, and we know that innocent civilians on both sides can often be caught in these conflicts, and we want to ensure that everything is done to support those humanitarian efforts to protect people on all sides, while at the same time holding the terrorist Hamas groups who've committed these terrible assaults to proper account.
There are Canadian citizens in Gaza, though, Minister Blair. I wonder what you said to the Israeli defense minister about that. We've spoken to some of them. Their houses have been shelled out. The hotel they moved into have been blown up. They're seeking shelter, and they're afraid for their lives.
Yeah, and my message to the Canadians who are in Gaza, and frankly to all people who could find themselves in such a difficult situation, certainly for the Canadians that are there, to reach out to us by phone. Unfortunately, we're unable to get consular officials into the area, but we are in contact with them, and we will do everything we can to support them and to keep them safe. And at the same time, there was conversation among all the allies about the importance of not creating a greater humanitarian crisis as Israel does what is required to defend their country and their borders.
But Minister Blair, how are Canadians in Gaza supposed to reach out when electricity has been cut off, food, fuel, the sort of necessities you need to do these things, and there's no humanitarian corridor or safe passage out of the Gaza Strip?
And at the present time, you're right. Then we would urge anyone who is in those circumstances to shelter in place. And at the same time, we'll continue to support the United Nations refugee program that is providing support to people in those very difficult circumstances. We all want to ensure that there is no greater humanitarian crisis created in this very unfortunate situation. And we will be there for people who may find themselves in this difficulty. Certainly for Canadians that are in Gaza, David, we are concerned for their safety, and we will do everything we possibly can in order to provide them with a safer environment and the supports that they may require.
One of the Israeli ministers, the energy minister Katz, posted today on social media saying that no electrical switch will be turned on, no water hydrant will be opened, and no fuel truck will enter Gaza until the abductees are sent free. They're resolute in their determination to eliminate Hamas, but there's been criticism from people who've worked for the United Nations and other aid groups that this amounts to collective punishment against a civilian, non-combatant population and may violate international law. How do you view that as Minister of Defense?
Well, certainly, I think the safety of innocents should be everyone's priority, and at the same time, we also know the Israelis are dealing with a very difficult adversary in Gaza. But we want to ensure that we do everything to support those who are non-combatants and who may be caught in very, very difficult circumstances, and we want to ensure the safety of everyone who on both sides of that border who will need the help and who could face really very significant challenges in those circumstances. And so we'll do everything we can to continue to support the innocents in this situation while recognizing the importance for Israel to deal with the criminals. And as you mentioned, David, there are many people who've been taken hostage in these circumstances, and there is real concern for their safety. And so we will continue to monitor that situation very, very closely, to provide support for any Canadians who may be caught in those circumstances, and at the same time understand the importance of Israel to try to repatriate safely those people who've been taken hostage. So
Minister Blair, just as a final point on Israel, how does Canada thread that needle? You can understand the desire to seek vengeance on Hamas and eliminate them as a threat to the Israeli population, and that is the number one determination of the operation that we're potentially going to see. How do you support Israel in that while also taking steps to protect the innocents and civilians when there is no humanitarian corridor or no way out for them, and we don't know when the ground invasion is going to happen?
I believe, David, that Israel understands the importance of not allowing a further humanitarian suffering to take place as they deal appropriately with this Hamas terrorist threat. These are circumstances that the region unfortunately has faced in the past. We'll continue to monitor it very carefully and offer whatever support we can to both those innocent civilians who may be caught in these very terrible circumstances, while understanding the important work that Israel is doing in order to deal with this terrorist threat and to effect the safe repatriation of those who have been taken hostage.
This, of course, is all happening while Ukraine continues to battle the Russians, and that's, I think, the primary reason why you were in Brussels today. We've seen issues in the United States, particularly around the leadership in the House of Representatives in terms of which is going to get more of a focus now, Israel or Ukraine. What concerns do you have that the security focus of the most important military partner NATO has shifting away from Ukraine to Israel at this point in time?
Well, I wouldn't presume to speak for him, but I can tell you that Secretary Austin was very clear. While on the one hand they are providing support and assistance to Israel in countering the Hamas threat, they are unwavering in their continued support for Ukraine. And I can also share with you, David, around the NATO table, among all our allies, and we did spend most of yesterday talking. President Zelensky was here, and the defense minister from Ukraine as well. Every country was clear and unequivocal in their unwavering support for Ukraine in their valiant struggle against Russian aggression and the invasion of their country, and we're going to continue to do what is required to provide them with the support that they need in that struggle.
Support may be unlimited, Minister, but supplies and materials and supply chains being what they are, those things can be limited. It's something even President Zelensky acknowledged this week, that in the wake of this attack, there's only a certain amount of military support to go around. So can the West, can NATO do both at the same time with the supplies that are available and the needs that exist?
Well, to be very clear, Israel has only asked the United States to provide support, and the United States has been very clear that they're going to support Israel and at the same time continue with the same level of support that they've been providing to Ukraine. But all of the NATO allies were very clear, and we also discussed at some length some of the real challenges that all countries in the NATO alliance are facing in securing ammunition and other essential supplies in order to support Ukraine and fulfill their own capability requirements for the defense of their own countries and for the NATO region. But at the same time, that support was strong and unwavering, and I remain very confident that we will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes with what they require to defend their country.
So, Minister, as a final question, with what's happening in Ukraine and with what is now happening in Israel, how close are we potentially to this spiraling to a much broader conflict? The idea of other players coming into the situation between Israel and Hamas right now?
David, to be clear, what has taken place in Ukraine and now in Israel is deeply concerning to all our allies. But I think the strength of the NATO alliance, the unity among all of the partners was clearly evident here in Brussels over the past 2 days. We remain resolute in standing with each other and working together to maintain peace throughout the world. And so I was actually quite encouraged by the unity of purpose and the commitment that was clearly on display here at NATO. We all are committed to maintaining peace and to confront the violent aggressions that have taken place in both Ukraine and now in Israel.
Minister of National Defense Bill Blair, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, David.